yang into medicine, where one of the things that I see here is with the body structures, how do you associate yang with back, yin with front? Why is the head yang, the yin body? This sort of relationship here doesn't necessarily make sense to me.
Okay.
And then why would your back be associated with fitness podcast? We're doing our second part on acupuncture and Chinese medicine. From here, we're going to let Jeffrey Lee introduce the concepts and just have him kind of use me as a sounding board to give some more information out to the general public.
Once again, my name is Jeffrey Lee. I am a New York licensed acupuncturist. Thank you again, Josh, for having me here on your podcast and giving me the opportunity to promote my brand as well as this field of medicine that I have become so involved with. So I guess the first thing that we need to know about in terms of for acupuncture is the concept of yin and yang, or yin and yang. Josh, have you ever heard of that before?
I believe we discussed the very, very top shallow level of it last time. Basically, the masculine and feminine energy. I believe heat was male, cold was female, and just very like scraping the surface.
Yes.
So yeah, I'd like to go a little deeper into that.
Yes. Yin and yang in a more broad and also specific sense is the concept of opposites, complement and complementary. Like you discussed, male and female, they're opposites, but they're also complementary. Hot and cold, opposites and complementary. So many more examples of these, such as inside, outside, lateral, medial, up and down, front and back, etc. And this is an extremely important concept of within acupuncture. And something I actually want to touch upon is the concept of, specifically when applied to medicine and acupuncture, is the concept of heat and cold. Typically, women, they may be more cold, whereas men, they may feel more warm. But think of hot and cold as like cups of water being mixed into like a third cup. If you mix equal parts hot and cold, then the temperature will be decently warm and comfortable. Whereas, let's say, and now we're bringing the concept of excess and deficiencies. Let's say you have yin excess, and you have too much yin, not enough yang, you're going to feel more cold. Now, let's say you have you add in more yang and you keep the same amount of yin, you're going to be more warm. Now, conversely, let's say you are pouring the water, but you now don't have as much yin energy, you're going to feel warm, which is a yin deficiency. And if you don't pour in as much warm water, you're going to have a yang deficiency, so you're going to feel more cold. Does that make sense?
The only issue, and I don't want to go too far down a tangent here, but the only issue I see with that, again, I think very Western.
Sure.
So heat is a thing. Cold is an absence of a thing.
Yes.
So my conceptual framework is that those are each not individual things.
Sure.
The heat disperses.
Yes.
Not cold. Cold does not disperse.
Yes. So
if that makes sense.
So I guess what I'm strictly talking about is not like the physical, like in the Western physics, and also being reductive. I understand that there is heat, and then there is the absence of heat, which we colloquialize as cold. But now, specifically in Chinese medicine, we can think of it as cold water versus warm or hot water when combining the two. So strictly in that sense.
It's strictly in a conceptual framework.
Yes.
Okay.
So once again, we have yin and yang, as well as the states of excess versus deficiency. Both of them can be in either excess or deficiency, and you would get resulting feeling of cold or feeling of warm or hot in this case. So that's like the main function ways to think about when applied to acupuncture and Chinese medicine. Now, there's also a bunch of other terms and the concepts in terms of yang being immaterial versus yin being material. So yin being substance versus yang being the function and the physiology. when in terms of anatomy and physiology. Then yang can also be acute diseases. Yin is chronic. Yang is rapid, very fast. Yang is more chronic, built up over time. Yang would be like restless, like energy. Yin would be a state of rest. Um, and yeah, that's pretty. Yang would be thirst, coarse breathing. Yin would be cold, no thirst, shallow breathing. Yang would be at constipation. Yin would be uh, loose stools or diarrhea. So you see how all of these are in a state of either like if you have too much warmth or you don't have enough warmth in your body, or you have too much cold or not enough cold in your body.
My association with constipation,
Mm-hmm.
I guess for me, I don't understand how that would apply to heat and cold. I don't understand how these connections are a framework that I'm not inducted into. So how does that associate? Because there are things in here, and we're going based off of notes that you've created that are really good for me to see what you're thinking through,
Mm-hmm.
but something that generates versus grows. Yang is generates, yin is grows. I would think both of those as a generating power. Growth generates and creates more. If something is growing, there is more of that. So, how does generation versus growing become opposites? This is something that we would go a little bit more into. And I know those are two very different concepts, but just kind of separating out the yin and the yang a little bit more.
So let's say with in the specific context of stools. So let's say you need the proper amount of fluids in your body in order to properly excrete the stools. Now let's say you have either too much warmth in your body, which is excess yang coming in either from too much heat in the environment, too much spicy food, or foods that are just dry in general, like you haven't drank enough water. And all the foods that you eat are like bread, cereals, spicy food, peppers, etc. Or you have the opposite, which is you're not drinking enough water in your body, you're not resting enough. So then your stools will come out rather dry. You would have constipation. You might not even have stools at all. Now the opposite would be, let's say you're in a very turbid or very damp environment, or you're not reabsorbing enough liquids in your large intestines. Now there's too much fluid in there, and so you might even have diarrhea, or in an extreme circumstance cases, or even watery stools, or loose stools in a less severe sense. That would be more yin excess, which we would call dampness, or a yang deficiency.
Okay. So it more goes into, it could definitely go into water flow within your body
Yes.
is one of the big parts, I would say. So the application to medicine, I
Mm-hmm.
think, is one of the four aspects of the yin yang relationship would be kind of our next section to go over. What are the four aspects of the relationship, and then how does that apply to medicine?
So the four aspects are: one, the opposition is relative between yin and yang. It's not absolute. There's always relativity. There's always a state of balance. Then there's interdependence, meaning one cannot exist without the other. Complementary, man and woman, hot and cold, light and dark, front and back. You can't just have one without the other. It just won't exist. The third would be the mutual consumption, or in this case, like the dynamic balance, or what we know as dynamic equilibrium or homeostasis in our bodies. And the fourth is the intertransformation. The best example I could say is in Avatar: The Legend of Korra, how Rava and Vatu, if Vatu were to win and Rava were to be completely destroyed, she's not technically destroyed. She'll just be reborn 10,000 years later. And then if Vatu were to be destroyed, he would be reborn 10,000 years later. There's always a cyclical
Nature.
intertransformation and nature to it.
So that would go to be like everything from the cycle of carbon dioxide to oxygen in trees in a properly interacting system in nature, and that would go with the same thing with our passing of the two gases within our lungs to the flow of oxygen to our cells in our blood, interrelating
Yes.
those gases, and that would be the yin yang relationship.
Yes, and now with an even broader sense, something that we can actually we could visibly see, the day-night cycle, the seasons changing. Autumn and winter would be more the yin seasons, while spring and summer are more the yang seasons. Sunlight during the day is more the yang, and then dusk into night is the yin. Whereas there's all, and now the intertransformation would be yang transforming into yin, meaning high noon into dusk into twilight or midnight. Then that would be the yang gradually going into yin. Then reverse that, going from midnight into dawn into high noon would be the yin transforming into the yang.
Hmm.
So one can never exist without the other, and they're always constantly changing and transforming into one another.
Okay, so then I guess we can take that into the yin yang into medicine, where one of the things that I see here is with the body structures. How do you associate yang with back, yin with front? Why is the head yang, the yin body? This sort of relationship here doesn't necessarily make sense to me.
Okay.
And then why would your back be associated with, let's say, heat, when I think of your core as your heat bearing portion of your body?
So the reason as to why the back is specifically yang versus the front is yin would be because back in ancient China, when they were working the field, their backs would be the ones exposed to the sun, while their
Mm,
fronts are exposed to the earth as they're constantly bent down working the farms and the fields. Yin would be the earth, or you could, if you're pessimistic, you could even say hell, but we're going to go with earth in this aspect, in this case. And then yang would be heaven, or the rising. So again, yin is descending, yang is rising. So that's why the head is the most yang aspect of your body, whereas the body would be, more lower, whereas your feet are the most yin aspect of your body.
mm. Interesting. Okay.
Then you have the exterior versus the interior. Yang is moving outward, expanding. Yin is contracting, moving inward. And as we just explained, above the waist is yang, below the waist is yin. Posterior versus and lateral are yang versus anterior, and medial are yin, as we just described. Now, as for the organs, the yang organs, or the yang function of the organs, is the physiology, whereas the yin function of the organs is more for storage, as well as the structure, versus yang is physiology and more like the functions of transforming like all the food that you eat into workable components for your cells. Now, then we're going to get into the vital substances, which are qi and blood, as I'm sure we've all heard of, which we'll get to later. And yeah.
So the concept of chi is tough because a lot of people would see the chi energy as something that would be on the spectrum of like electromagnetic energy. And that's
Yes.
not exactly what I gathered from our interaction last time. It seemed to be more associated with the interconnectedness of the systems within our body and how the blood interacts with the rest of the body. Am I correct in stating that, or is that a misunderstanding on my part?
I would say that is a good interpretation of it. Uh, and we're going to get to that. We can get to that now, actually. But chi is, in a sense, like the energy within our bodies. It's not necessarily something that can be measured, but it is there. Otherwise, we wouldn't be alive. It's what gives us our life. And there's a specific way as to how it is produced, but then there's even stuff before that that also has to be addressed. So we're going to go to chapter 3, vital substances. And so before we even touch on chi, there's a few things that come before it, which is what is described as the vital substances in our body. So there's essence, blood, chi, and then fluids and shen. We're gonna touch on all of those. So essence is there's two forms. There's pre-heaven essence, and then there's post-heaven essence. Pre-heaven essence is what we get from our parents. It is hereditary. You could almost consider it as a genetic predisposition for specific things. So if you have, if you have good pre-heaven essence from your parents, you have good genetics, you could be more resilient to certain things. You could be stronger, good appetite, longer lifespan, etc. Whereas post-heaven essence is the essence that you receive from food, and is what your body produces, like via the usable components of food, such as protein, such as carbohydrates, such as amino acids, lipids, vitamins, minerals, etc. Is there?
This seems to be more of a conceptual understanding of the pre-understanding of genetics and consumption-based health.
Yes.
So it just seems to be a different structure of categorization, and that makes a ton of sense to me. And this is the sort of connections that I'm looking to make for the people who are watching, which the content isn't easily digestible to understand. Your post-heaven essence. It's the food you eat and how it affects your health.
Yeah, because again, like, this was medicine from over 5,000 years ago, whereas modern medicine is at best 150 years, I would, in terms of how new it is. So back then, of course, they didn't have microscopes. They didn't have the concept of genetics. They only had, this man and woman come together to create a child. Well, why is there so much variation? Oh, it has to be something to do with the parents. So that's where the concept of pre-heaven essence comes in. And then you see, like, oh, well, why are these two people, even though they have the same parental, like, figures, both parents are pretty healthy. Well, then why are they different? It must be, well, what are they doing in their lives? Oh, it must be the food. It must be their lifestyle. It must be the amount of work that they do, their stress levels, their sleep, everything.
Okay.
So yeah, we did touch upon the concept of essence. We're going to have to go on to chi. So chi starts off with the production as actually blood. So now we have to touch on blood. So blood is produced when first we eat foods. There goes through a huge separation process, but it's going to first get taken in by the stomach. It gets sent into the spleen. That energy gets transported to the lungs, where it gets combined with the energy from the air, and then that goes to the heart, where that energy gets transformed into blood. Now, how it works is spleen create that energy that it gets sent to the lungs. That chi is called food chi. Yes, there are different types of chis as well. There's different types of chis as well as different chis within each organ. So the food chi gets transported to the lungs, where it gets combined with air, the chi in the air, which creates gathering chi, because it gathers the food energy as well as the air energy, the yin and yangs, and then it goes into the heart, where it gets combined with the essence, the original chi, into forming blood. And now blood is how we nourish our body, how we circulate everything. And we make sure we have good hair, like good hair luster, good complexion, um, good recovery, good everything. Now, chi from blood is where chi is actually produced, and there's actually another. Now we're going again back into yin yang relationship, where chi is the yang energy and blood is the yin energy. So blood creates chi, but chi controls blood. So blood again creates chi, but then chi is going to make sure that blood is circulating correctly, so it can produce more chi, and therefore blood is ensured that the circulation is good again. So that's the whole, a very, like, weird concept to grasp.
Very, very interesting, and a little bit tough, because for me, again, trying to take a concept that isn't provable and understand it and believe it is very tough, especially when I know that the blood is formed in a certain way
Yes.
cellularly. And I know that, when you say that the blood is formed in the heart in chi, I would see that as a misunderstanding in traditional medicine of the idea that, yes, energy does come from the air in the form of oxygen, and then that helps drive cellular motors, but there isn't a different step in the heart. The heart is just a pump. And
Yes.
that's where my disconnect in the systems, between the two medicinal systems becomes, because the concepts of chi have developed over a long time period, and some of the understandings are correct and some are what I would say are incorrect.
Of
Again, that's
course.
me, so it's either a misunderstanding or however that is. But the functional aspect of the application of the medicine doesn't have to match up with the correctness of the statement of the model of the medicine itself.
Yes.
So that's where I have an issue, where I believe in the utility of acupuncture and non-traditional medicine, but not necessarily the modeling.
So I can actually counter that. You said how the heart is a pump. That is correct. Now, what I said before though was that the heart takes the energy from the food, energy from the air, and combines it with essence. Essence, its material form, is actually the bone marrow. And as we both know, that's where blood is actually produced in the